Welcome to a series I like to call Disowned Dad. It's a series where I go over a tier list of reasons of why I went no contact with my dad, listing reasons from like most heinous to less so on a tier list, but also going in chronological order. If you are new here, I do suggest watching some of the previous videos. It's going to give you more context, more background than what you're going to get from these future videos. Today's episode might be a bit weird. This memory is a little bit more fresh. Not that it happened recently, but that I just recently remembered a repressed memory. If you know anything about repressed memories, sometimes it can be a little bit jarring when you remember them. If it has trauma associated to it, it just can be like a lot to process. This is probably like my 15th take or so. But now that I've done this a few more times, I think I can at least like tell the story a little bit better than when I was first going to. This is just my process and how I deal with things and how I'm working through this. And so I appreciate you guys going through this journey with me and supporting this series. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into today's episode. It is called Opening Distrust. This is episode 6. Previously on Disowned Dad, this is our previous tier list of things that we've kind of gone over. Again, this is going to be a little bit different just because this does need a little bit of background in terms of layout. As you can see, my room had 2 entrances. One was from the hallway side, and then the other one was actually through the bathroom. So you can actually go through this washer dryer layout into the bathroom, and then you can also get into my room. You can lock the door from inside the bathroom, but from my room side, you actually couldn't really lock the door from that side, but you could lock the door from the hall side. So that's a little bit important to note. Just for layout purposes and just visualization. The second thing to note is that I actually wasn't allowed to lock my door under any circumstances, and this was under the pretense of safety, which I didn't really understand at first, considering that there's actually like a giant window here and we were on the first story, so if there was a fire I could easily get out. And then the fact that the bathroom door didn't lock from within the room, so I can still get out through more exits really than any other room in here. My dad did this no locking this door rule because he wanted to form some sort of trust between each other by being able to just like knock on the door and then saying when we can like enter each other's rooms. I rarely even did that for his door, but he would do it more on my door. I made it clear from the beginning that this form of trust was important to him, and I did my very best to be understanding and accommodating for this, despite the many red flags, as I like stated before, just to kind of respect his wishes and try to build a bond with him, because he was my dad, and he wasn't really in my life a whole lot, so I was like, oh, he's trying to get closer to me, not really realizing this was also just kind of a form of control. This memory does start with a fight between my dad and I. In the last video titled Anger Issues, I did kind of go over what fights were like with my dad, where things never were physical to the extent of physical abuse, but it was never completely off the table in that sense of you never know if it could ever get to that point. And just like any fight with my dad, I couldn't really tell you what the fight was really about, just that it happened. It started turning less of a bickering and more of he was trying to put me into a corner. I was at a point where I was so cornered where I felt like I was starting to tear up and I was about to cry. And the thing is to note about this is that I had a previous discussion with my dad that I would rarely cry to begin with. At an earlier age, I was, believe it or not, a really big crybaby. When I was growing up, I would cry for like the littlest things just because emotions were just really overwhelming for me for pretty much anything, whether it was like joyful, sad, frustration, anger, that sort of thing. Couldn't really have any like social life with adults or even kids my age due to it, so I started repressing it pretty early on. Long story short, I felt the need to have to repress my emotions. So when I was with my dad, there was a certain point where he could tell that I was at a point where I was going to cry. And he's like, you can be vulnerable with me. I want to be a safe space where you can cry in front of me. And so at this point, I was like, okay, this is good. This is healthy, where I can allow myself to cry whenever I feel these big feelings, and so I'll be able to cry. The problem with that is that I don't think my dad realized how much I had those feelings of wanting to cry or just being overwhelmed, the stress or whatever. When we would get into these little arguments or like really emotional talks, I would start crying. And he started thinking that I was doing this to manipulate his feelings, whether so that I can get my way or like to prove a point in some form of fashion. And maybe I was winning to him these arguments way too much through crying. But in reality, it was just like he was pulling these emotions out of me. I want to clarify, I never broke out in tears theatrically. It was always when I was pushed in hard conversations or subjects that I suppressed or was not used to talking about that made me uncomfortable. He would see I was tearing up, holding back the tears, mind you, and when he pointed it out by asking if I was gonna cry or on the verge of crying, that's when I couldn't hold them back anymore. And I just couldn't explain to him in big detail as to why I was even crying in the first place. I was on the verge of tears when I was feeling cornered in this moment of this fight with my dad, and I just felt like I needed a break from him. I needed him to kind of step back, at least like emotionally, within this discussion, whatever. I call it a discussion, but really I think it was like a fight. I've come up with some really hurtful things in my head, but I've never had said them out loud to him in this way. And in this moment, I felt like I really needed to. So I said something really hurtful. I couldn't really tell you what I said in that moment. Just, I know that it took him back or like took him by surprise. Within the discussion, it was like, I can't believe you said that. That's so out of character for you. And I took that moment to basically run. Immediately, I was rushing through the hallway, and then I closed the door. And in that moment of closing the door, I was debating whether I should lock it, knowing full well that if he found out that I locked the door, that he would be really pissed. But at this point, my instincts were telling me that something could happen, that he's gonna like break down the door because I had said something really hurtful, and maybe I thought he was like gonna chase me from some sort of retaliation from the words that I said, and I was just like a little bit scared in that moment. But I was also fighting with the whole logical side of like, well, he would never do that. He would never break his promise because my dad doesn't like to be perceived as a hypocrite or like a liar. So he wouldn't do that. But my instincts were screaming much louder of like, you're in danger right now. Like, I could kind of feel not just shock from the instance, but a little bit of bubbling anger. So I didn't really know what kind of reaction I was really gonna get, and I think instinctually I didn't really want to find out. At that moment, I closed the door, locked the door within that split second of all those thoughts rushing in. And since I was on the verge of tears, I didn't want him to see my vulnerabilities. I didn't want him to hear me at all. I rushed to the other side of the room. I don't know if it was closed already or not, but I braced myself against the door just in case he would try to go through the bathroom and try to access my room that way. And at this point, I was basically in a fetal position, just kind of covering my ears with my hands. And there was just all these overwhelming emotions just rushing inside me. What did I do? What did I say? Why did I say that? I'm a horrible daughter. Upon some reflection and remembering some things slowly, I came to realize that guilt was only masking the underlying fear I had towards my dad. At this moment, I was beating myself up for not following along with what he was saying or not being able to keep up with the mask of a, in quote, good daughter, because we were both really manipulating each other in the end. And I'm not really afraid to admit that now. I was mostly trying to play the same game that he was, but I was also trying to survive till I could find an escape. And at this moment, I was scared because I messed up. I let some anger and true feelings mix in because I was backed into a corner and I wasn't sure if I could fix things to how they were before, and I wasn't sure what it was gonna cost me later in the end. He probably hates me right now. He's probably so pissed at me, and like, why did I do that? And like, the guilt was already forming, but also I was feeling not just the guilt from what I said, but also the emotions from the discussion that was being had beforehand. I can't fully remember what that was, but it was just like everything was rushing in. I just felt so vulnerable, so closed off from the world. Like there was just no help. I just felt trapped, just like I was trapped in that room. And all of this was just kind of going on. I was starting to feel guilty, and I could hear him outside of my door at a certain point. Like I can sense that he was angry at first, and then he kind of calmed down, and then he was like trying to coax me out of the room, like say it's okay, and that made me feel even more guilty, and I was like, maybe I should let him in. And in that moment, that's when I heard the click from the doorknob trying to be opened, and that's when my blood froze. I thought we had this sort of respect that he wouldn't open the door, he would wait for permission. And I was just thrown out the window just from him trying to open this door when I was in a vulnerable state. Even if he was going to open the door a crack, that was still a breach in what we had built in that moment. Shattered in an instant. Everything, all the thoughts that were running through my head were like wiped away, now being like replaced with new emotions of betrayal and like, how could he do that? How could he feel like he has that right over me to just like open the door? And does this relationship between us mean nothing? And it was so overwhelming, and everything was just tight in my chest. The tears were still flowing, and I was just trying to tune out the world. Everything was just like going black, and everything was just so loud. And I must have been in that state for maybe like a couple hours, at least an hour. By the time I realized what was even happening, because I was going through like these fits of anger, sometimes even standing up and like trying to calm myself down, getting back into another fit. Eventually coming back to reality. I could hear him watching TV in his room, and I was like still trying to calm myself down, trying to wipe away the tears that were now just like, I could just feel the salt of my face from them drying. And at that moment that he found out that the lock was that it was locked, that he was angry in that moment, which then while I was having those that episode of just emotions, I could feel his anger, and I was also feeling my own emotions. And so that was also why there was like that endless spiral of like dealing with my own emotions and then also processing the fact that he was angry, of even finding out that my door was closed, and then him calming back down, and then like going to the living room. I know I'm going back and forth a lot. I feel like some of the things that I'm missing, so I just want to clarify. But in that moment, I knew my dad well enough that I knew he really wasn't like paying attention to whatever he was listening to. I know he was just doing it to like make it seem like he was distracted in some form or fashion. And so as I was like opening the door, I was opening it carefully. I didn't want him to really like hear me fully, but I knew he was paying attention because I knew my dad well enough that that's just the kind of person that he was. I don't remember who like broke the silence first. I just know I walked out, and I was just kind of like behind him, debating if I should say something. And I don't know if I said something first or if he said something. But then we started talking about it again, and we had like a heart-to-heart is what I vaguely remember. But then he did kind of bring up the topic of the fact that I had locked the door, and there was definitely some irritation in his voice, some suppressed anger that I could tell that he wanted to say more in that moment, but stopped himself. I could feel it, and I was like upset myself. My comeback was, well, you wouldn't have realized that it was locked in the first place if you didn't try opening it. You wouldn't have known. You know, that kind of threw him off in the sense that I kind of like bit back from what he had said. Previously, when he would like say certain things like that, I'd be like, yeah, you're right. Like, I'm in the wrong, like as if I was a child, but I was definitely over or at least 18 at that time. So I was definitely an adult or trying to be an adult, act more of an adult. It definitely caught him by surprise. He was like, well, yeah, you got me there. I don't even have a comeback for that. In a sense, that kind of like made me upset because then he just tried to like brush it off as if it was like a hee hee ha ha kind of thing, like you got me there. And then he apologized about it and we like did some sort of discussion about it. But in that moment was, I think, a breaking point of the trust I had with my dad, and it was never the same after that. There was definitely incidences that happened afterwards that didn't help the case, but I think this story was definitely a breaking point. I really did want to have a good relationship with my dad because he didn't have like a good relationship with anybody in our family. I was the only person he had, and I think he really relied on me for that, and that put a lot of pressure on me. Yeah, I'm the only person he has, and I have that sense of responsibility of keeping that between us. But in reality, it was him. He was the reason why we don't have a relationship anymore. His actions. I was trying my best all those years to keep the peace, keep things together, and he was the one who broke it, especially in this moment. Hope you guys enjoy the series. You guys seem to support it and enjoy it, so I'm gonna do my best to make these as soon as possible. I'm not gonna make any promises of like every single week, but I'm gonna try every other week. Depending on the severity of the video, like this one took a while for me to make. So many different takes, so many different ways to say things. We have to put this on a tier list. So for today's tier, this was what we had previously, and obviously we're gonna put this as an S tier because this was a pivoting point for the relationship between my dad and I. So again, thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for your support, and we will see you guys next time. Bye bye.